Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Welcome to another episode 225 of the Marketing Your Practice podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to share with you some of the biggest take-homes that I've personally had from almost 25 years in practice. You see, a little over 8 weeks ago, I finished up in practice. Now, I don't know how long I'm finishing up in practice for, whether it be for a long time, for good, or whether it maybe just be for a few months. I'm really open to see what happens. Now, I've had a number of weeks, 8 weeks, to really sit back and reflect on some of the greatest learnings that I've had since then, and I want to share some of them with you. I want to start with this. The calling for me to finish up in practice and go full-time to help to simplify this marketing, to help coach practitioners to have more impact, more influence, make more income in their practice has been a calling for me for about 5 years now. But for whatever reason, I have been coming up with a lot of different excuses for why it can't happen, why now wasn't the right time. At the pointy end of that was really this beautiful relationship that I had built up with all of my patients. And I was telling myself I didn't know how they would go without me. Quite arrogant, really, when you think about it. You know, I was wondered whether somebody else would come in and take the same care of them that I would. And of course, somebody has. And I would argue that Pat is maybe even taking better care of them than I am. He's there a lot more than I was. But I had a lot of different reasons why I couldn't finish up. As a result, I made the last 5 years emotionally quite difficult for myself. There was a number of back and forwards in my mind. My gorgeous wife, Lauren, I don't know how she put up with me talking about it all the time, and how she didn't finally just look at me and say, for heck's sake, will you just hurry up and do this? But she didn't. She was incredibly patient with me. She was compassionate, and she continued to ask great questions that allowed me to be curious about what was going on. So in the weeks leading into it, as you can imagine, we're 25 years almost in practice, 22 in this practice I'm talking about now. It feels like, and had felt like to me, that there were a number of patients that I had been looking after since the very first month that I'd been there. And it felt like for these people I had been having an ongoing conversation for years. Sometimes there was a week, sometimes there was a month in between those conversations, sometimes there was 6 months or even a year. But I'd seen people through births and deaths and marriages and divorces, new jobs, moves, all those kind of things there. And like you, I'm sure, I'd become a part of their family. So in the weeks leading up to it, there were lots of tears shed by all of us, lots of hugs as well. Now, after all of this was said and done, on the morning going into my practice for the last morning, my beautiful daughter Mackenzie had decorated the practice. It was full of balloons and streamers, and she'd written up on the big blackboard. In fact, let me take you one step forwards. I was driving to work, and I'd been commuting a little longer than normal because of the move of house. And so I had about an hour 15 commute into work. And I was not looking forward to it at all because, I felt like I was breaking up with a great friend. And I decided about halfway into work that I needed to kind of shift my focus and instead see this as a celebration. 3 minutes away from me pulling into work, I'm a big Bon Jovi fan. Bon Jovi played a beautiful role in my growing up. And about 3 minutes pulling into work, Living on a Prayer came on my radio, and I cranked it up loud. And by the time I stepped out of my car, then I was upbeat, I was feeling fantastic, and I went and had a beautiful, beautiful morning. When it had finished, I'd had a long adjusting shift, maybe sort of 5 or 6 hours of just flat out adjusting people and hugging people and crying with people. I was sitting in my car out the front of the practice, and I had a moment there where sitting still, 22 years flashed before my eyes, and I saw the different paint colours and my practices had different names over that time. It started off as Pyke Family Chiropractic, and then it went to Pyke Family Wellbeing Centre, and then it went to Life Chiropractic, and it's had different colours and logos and people working in there. And I kind of saw all of that, a bit like you would kind of see in a movie with things kind of racing in front of your mind. That's what it felt like. And then all of a sudden I had this sense come over me of just great ease, that's it, it's done and it's finished. And the ease of it all is what really struck me. You see, this had been 5 years of me making this whole transition out of practice very, very difficult. As I mentioned, I'd come up with lots of excuses. I couldn't sell my practice, and I sold it in a week. I wouldn't find somebody great to take over from me, and we found Pat, and he's done a great job. Like, everything just went so straightforward, but I had made it so big inside of my mind that I couldn't help be aware at that moment about what other things are there that I've wanted to do over maybe my entire 46 years, and what other things had I wanted to do going forwards that I was making way too difficult, that I was making them out to be way bigger than what they ought to. And that gave me this real sense of kind of lightness. Like I feel a freedom now where I feel open to trying a whole bunch of new things, to experimenting, and to wondering what other things in my future are actually a whole bunch easier than what they really, or what my mind is making them out to be. So I really hope that makes sense to you. It's the major lesson that I have learned so far, but there are a number of other lessons which I want to share with you right now about what I've learned in particular over the last 24 years in practice. The first one I want to share with you is that don't believe everything that everybody tells you, including this little podcast that you're perhaps listening to right now. I was, in my early days in practice, really susceptible to what any charismatic coach might have said. Now, whether it had been in a book, whether it had been at a seminar I was listening to, and I love to go to seminars. I was a seminar junkie, and I still am open to learning to somebody or learning something new. And every time somebody said something fantastic, I was implementing it in my practice without stopping to think. And just by their very nature, the people that tend to speak on the stages around the world tend to be these wonderfully charismatic people. In fact, we say lots of interesting things as chiropractors when we get together. I'm going to talk about that in a moment when I refer to being humble as well. But I really want you to stop and think, do these things that I say today, do they resonate with you? Maybe some of them might, and some of them won't, and that's okay. That it wasn't until maybe I was, sadly for me to admit this, maybe 10 years in practice, that I had enough confidence that I could start to pick and choose what people were telling me. Then just because somebody said something that it was right for them didn't mean that it had to be right for me. In fact, the only time ever that I have had a complaint against me, and a complaint that went to the registration board and almost went to a formal hearing, was really when I was just blindly following the advice of somebody else. I had a really charismatic and influential coaching program I was about in the early days. There was lots of it that I really loved, more of it that I loved than I didn't. But there were some things that just didn't match me and the way that I wanted to communicate with my patients. But I didn't have the self-confidence to follow what my heart and what my gut was telling me. And so I blindly followed this. And as a result of that, I ended up with a complaint. Now, the complaint was interesting because even when I look back on it right now, I didn't really do anything wrong. And the gentleman that made the complaint, it wasn't even him that put the complaint in, it was one of his buddies. He was really happy with the care that he got with me. It's just that one of his friends was a spinal surgeon, and he really disliked chiropractic and kind of made the complaint on behalf of him, which was the reason why it kind of got thrown out the day beforehand. But for some reason, I had the presence about me in that moment to sit down and say, what can I learn from this? And it was learning that, hey, maybe I needed to change my communication style. And even though in this particular, I was happy with how I communicated, I could see that this was going to get me in trouble in the future. So don't believe everything that everybody tells you. You can pick and choose, and you can take bits and pieces. And it leads me into this next point that I want to talk about here, which is the importance of remaining humble. As chiropractors, as natural health practitioners listen to this, we often see the world very differently. We see a difference in terms of where health comes from. We see a difference in terms of healing. We look at everything from vaccinations to the pandemic, incredibly different. And as a result of this different lens that we see the world, what often happens, and what I've often done, is I've often been really quite judgmental. I've blamed other people for them not being able to get it. I've been judgmental of the medical profession, the pharmaceutical companies. No, certainly they're not without fault. I want to just, state that point through here as well. But I always kind of looked out with regards to judgment. And that situation I talked about to begin with regards to the registration board, really showed me the importance of turning those fingers back towards me and seeing where I can take responsibility. I served, in fact, I found out recently, I was the longest serving president of the Chiropractors Association board, the Victorian branch here. And a number of times during that, when I was serving as president, there are a number of chiropractors who were having different difficulties. And it always fascinated me that those that could become humble, could stop and take ownership for some of the difficulties that happened. Things just seem to go so much more easily when I saw a chiropractor who was behaving in a really self-righteous way, who was very resistant to any kind of feedback, that's where things became really difficult. So being humble is something that I think is incredibly important for, and I think it's a leadership position that we really need to take as well. This leads on to point number 3. It's the importance of authenticity. It takes some time, and as I mentioned beforehand, it took me maybe 8 years to really have a confidence in terms of who I am and who I wanted to be as a chiropractor, where I could. Now, I'm a big fan of coaching. I've almost always had a coach, and I think that there's some importance in having somebody help you see your blind spots, somebody to help kind of accelerate your journey. But at the same time, when you're choosing a coach, I think it's important to find a coach who helps you become more of you ultimately, more of who you are inside of you, who your values match as well. Authenticity is one of the things that's so sadly missing nowadays. When I look at a social media account, that there's two things I find interesting, because there are plenty of social media accounts that have really large numbers. They might have tens of thousands of followers, but every now and then I find a social media account that has large followers, but just crazy engagement. Every time they put up a post, there's lots of interaction. And what's in common with almost all of those is this real sense of authenticity. That person is just being them. Now, you might be trying to fit in, you might be seeing somebody who's doing great on social media and you want to sort of do what they're doing. And modeling and mirroring what other people are doing is a great place to start. What'll help you in your community, what'll help you get an audience, what'll help you be a leader and to gather a following is really you being you. We've got enough. If there's somebody else doing somebody else, then let them do that. We really need you to step into being you. I'm saying you a lot through here as well. There's somebody right now in your community who's just begging for you to get out of your own way and be you, okay? So I think you get what I'm saying with regards to authenticity. The 4th point, and is to really think about this, is I want to encourage you to work on your people skills as much as your adjusting skills. It was very interesting in the months leading up to kind of finishing up in the practice there and getting a lot of feedback from the patients in terms of the relationship. One of the things that they were saying is they talked a lot about just that, the relationship that we'd had. Now, I know they'd got lots of wonderful results with their chiropractic care, but very few of them mentioned that. Very few of them mentioned about the the improvement in the energy, the less aches and pains, the pregnancies that they were able to have, the healthy children born, all those kind of things. What they talked about is the relationship, the people skills between the two of us. And this is something that I have a lot of students that come in and observe with me and have almost right from the start. And one of the things that I'm fascinated is they get to the end of it and then I say, have you got any questions? And they'll often ask me very technical questions in terms of why did you do this adjustment? Why do you do that adjustment? Those kind of things too. But they don't notice the little things that I do to build relationships, to connect with people, to show care, to show compassion. They're the things that I think that really make great chiropractors, that make great practitioners. Now, luckily for us, we don't need to choose one or the other. We don't need to be either great adjusters or great people persons. I think you know what I'm saying there too. We can be both of those things. But if I had to choose maybe one, I think the relationships that I've built is what's helped the referrals, the retention, and to create almost a healing environment because of who it is that I am. Now this, again, having extraordinary people skills and working on your people skills doesn't mean that I'm spending, 45 minutes with each adjustment. At different times, I'm going to talk about my practice changing there too, but the longest my adjustments have ever taken is 5 minutes. That's it. And I've built these wonderful relationships just on the back of being able to be present, to empathize, to show compassion, and really just be there with people there too. So for some people, people and communication skills comes really naturally to them, but not for all of us. It's something that I've had to really work at, to explore and watch. I'm fascinated with it. I'm very, very interested in people. So it's been something that I've been happy to read about and to watch with trial and error and see what worked. Point number 5, be mindful of quick wins, particularly in the early days of my practice. And for those of you that might be new in practice, or for those of you that are really looking for growth, there's a tendency for us to want to push for quick wins. In fact, we live in a world nowadays that is so focused on quick wins. The whole biohacking theme is really all about, how do I get faster? How do I kind of hack this result so I can get healthier faster, six-pack abs faster, all those kind of things. It's all about how do we get there faster as well. Now, faster sometimes works, but I think there's a couple of things when it comes time to building relationships, building a business, building your health. There's a reason that things take time. The irony is never lost on me. How many times I hear us as chiropractors complaining that our patients won't give us the time to help them get results, and yet you guys are coming to me saying, I need new patients tomorrow. What do I do? It's the same thing. The number of new patients that you have in your practice is a reflection of the health of your practice. If your practice is unhealthy, it's not going to be seeing a lot of new patients, and it's going to take some time to get it healthy before that will happen again. The times when I've had challenges, great lessons, has been where I've kind of pushed for quick wins. I remember once in the very early years of practice, I had a company come around to me who wanted to take over all my telephone and faxes in those days. They had this amazing deal, and then at the same time, along with the deal, if they took over and I signed a contract, then they were able to lease me a whole bunch of equipment. There was televisions and stereos and all these amazing things there that I thought they were giving me as a part of this 4-year lease. But I got to the end of that 4-year lease, and because I was after the quick win, I didn't read the contract. And not only did they have my phone bills and all those kind of bits and pieces, but they wanted all the equipment back. But I didn't have all of the equipment. I gave some of it to my mum, some of it to my sister, some of it broke. And as a result of not being able to give it back to them, I had to pay full price for all of it. It was there in the contract, which I didn't read. That quick win cost me in excess of $10,000. So always be mindful of quick wins. Now, along that theme, again, another one for those of you that are wanting really practice growth, or you're new in practice, is always remember to focus on the people in front of you, the ones that are there in your practice, not the ones that aren't there. Now, this can be the same for your social media. You might be saying, hey, listen, I made this video, Angus, and only 7 people watched it. Focus on and be grateful for those 7. Maybe you're only seeing 100 people in your practice this week or less, and you want to be seeing double that amount. There's a tendency for us to feel a sense of frustration, disappointment because we don't have the volume and the growth that we want. I remember reading a Greg McKeown book, and recently I might have even mentioned this quote too. I'll bastardize a little bit, but Greg says this. He says, gratitude gives us more of what we don't have. Yet when we focus on what we don't have, we lose what we've got. Okay, so when we're grateful for what we've got, we get more of it. When we focus on what we don't have, we lose what we actually have. So being grateful for the one, maybe the 2 people today who choose to actually come and see you, who go out of their way to come to your practice, who pull out their wallets and actually pay for you, being grateful for them, being present for them, as opposed to being frustrated for the people that didn't be there as well. Along that point there too, make sure there's an interesting thing too, this is another one that catches particularly a lot of new grads as well, is to make sure that your practice is about serving the needs of your community, not about serving your needs. If you're going in to work to have your sense of significance, importance met, if the show is all about you and you're the star of the show there too, then I want to warn you to be careful about it. Now, this doesn't mean rather that the practice shouldn't meet your values, some of your financial needs, some of your time needs. It should be all of those as well. But if you're going there to fulfill your sense of worth, if you're giving from a cup that's perhaps empty, that's a dangerous place to go. I see that end up in inappropriate relationships with patients. What it looks like more than anything is it looks like a sense of neediness in practice. And neediness is one of those things that we can smell from a mile away. We might not be able to articulate exactly what it is, but when we see neediness, and when we sense neediness, it's very repulsive. It will push patients away. So, if you need to work on yourself, let me remind you through here, in case you're worrying about it there too, you're lovable. You're born worthy. We're born at 100% of these things. So I love this concept, is that you can't actually increase in worthiness. You can't actually increase in lovability. That is full there. Okay. What it requires is not for somebody else to do something or recognize something. That's really about us. All right. So you're worthy, you're good enough, and you deserve this. And so go into practice to focus on serving other people's needs, not serving your own. Now this means, when possible, on to point number 9, I'm talking about, I missed one. I'm going to go back to number 8 here as well. And that is the importance of keeping it fresh and keep changing and reinventing yourself. I mentioned earlier on that my practice has had multiple iterations, different names, different techniques. In the early days when I started off, we practiced a very strict chiropractic biophysics. We had two-way traction, you name it. We went from that into very light, low force torque release and finished up kind of a Thompson diversified practice. We've gone from seeing as many as 60 and 70 patients an hour. I still don't know how I did it now. It was exhausting. Right the way to, seeing, probably 12 an hour in the end there too. So we've had all different versions, and I've had patients come with me throughout this entire journey. Love the journey. In fact, what they've been excited about have been what I've been excited about. So I remember talking with Miguel Cruz on here. Many of you are really wary about changing your practice because you think that patients will leave you. My contention and my experience is that when we change in practice, it actually keeps our patients as enthused, as excited as what we are as well. Now, there will always be some people that will want to work their way out there too, but constantly reinventing yourself. It's been said at least every 5 to 7 years, there should be some kind of major reinvention in the way that we do things. I think that's an important point. So on to point number 9 too. This is what I started to touch on before here. Always try to go above and beyond whenever possible. Okay, but this comes back to that point on neediness before. Be mindful of boundaries when it comes to here. I remember in the early days, I had this lovely guy who I said that I thought as a once-off, I'd come and see him early. I think my practice might have started at 7 a.m. in the morning, and for some reason, he couldn't come in. Ian was his name. And I said, I'll get there early. I'll see you at 6:30. I adjusted him once at 6:30. And then before I knew it, his regular time was there at 6:30. Now, here was the interesting thing is I ended up starting to resent Ian for that. He'd only done what I'd invited him to do. I wasn't clear on my boundaries. Adjusting Ian at 6:30 meant that I didn't have my preparation time. I hadn't set clear boundaries. And so when you don't set, because boundaries are really tricky to set, but if you don't set them, you'll end up with a pain of resentment. So you either end up with the pain of setting boundaries or you end up with the pain of resentment as well. So always try and go above and beyond, but be really clear about what your boundaries are as well. Number 11, I want to touch on through here as well. I've had a number of associates work with me over that time, and owning a practice is not for everybody. In fact, now, at the moment, we still have one practice down at Lara. I'm not one of those people that wants to own multiple practices. I admire, the people that bought my practice. Zach and Andrew have, I think, 60 practices. I don't know how they do it. They definitely have a skill set that I don't have. So 2 practices was enough, and now it's 1 for us. But don't think for one moment that owning a practice is the only way for you to have great success and fulfillment in chiropractic. It's absolutely not. It's not for everybody. The last 6 months of the practice after it had been sold, I continued to work on there for an associate. I loved being an associate. I could go in there, I could adjust all the people. I was all care, no responsibility. And in fact, as an associate, I actually earned more money than I did as a practice owner. So don't for one moment think that as a profession, we tend to kind of have this real hierarchy of, that the ultimate goal in practice is to own your own practice. I want you to really look at that because it's absolutely not my recommendation for probably most of you because it's a lot of hard work. You have to be a business owner, and I'm going to talk about that as a moment there too, is that, in fact, let's just get onto that now because owning the practice is not for everybody. That was point number 10. Point number 11 is that you do really need to be good at business. Okay, remember what we're running here is a business, not a charity. Unless you decide that it's a charity. If you've decided that your practice is a not-for-profit charity and all you're trying to do is cover your costs, then that's a different matter. But I'm yet to actually meet somebody that said that that's their outwardly stated aim. We're running a business, and we run a business to make a profit. Bills need to be paid, staff need to be paid. We're impacting a lot of people's lives by giving them full-time employment, as well as the more profitable your practice is and the more impact that you're having in your community. But most of us have very few skills with regards to that. I mean, this whole podcast is all about the marketing side of things, but that's only a small portion of, we need to be team training, we need to be hiring, we need to be firing, we need to be putting systems in place. All of those kind of things are all part of running business. There's accounting and taxation needs. That is something that you need to spend a significant portion of time on and get really good at. The good news is that we can all do this. This is not, the business side of things is not some special skill. It's not like learning calculus or anything like that. You need a good accountant. And sometimes it's being humble enough to say to your accountant, I did this a number of years ago, said, Andrew, can you explain this to me? I want you to go over a balance sheet for me and a profit and loss sheet. And I want you to do this like I'd never seen one before. Okay, now I had a good understanding of these, but again, Andrew was able to kind of clear some of these things up for me. I got an even better understanding of it as well. So you really need to be putting some time into being good at business. The last point I want to leave you with, I think we're up to number 12 here, is not to take it all too seriously. About 15 years ago, some great friends of ours, their daughter ended up with a nasty chest infection. The chest infection, her daughter was Maddie. I just had to remember that too. So it was Carly and Maddie. Her daughter, the chest infection actually ended up getting into her heart. And from memory, she ended up having some kind of cardiac arrest. So Maddie at this stage, I think, was very early primary school years. She was rushed into the children's hospital. And Carly talks about being with her in the emergency surgery room there too, when they had to literally bust open her chest. And one of the nurses had her hand inside of Maddie's chest and was massaging her heart to keep her alive. And Maddie ended up surviving that too. There's the summary of the story there too. But Carly talked about when she left the hospital that morning to go out and get some fresh air, she noticed and she looked around and she saw all the life that was still going on. And she was asking, she said, how can this possibly be happening? You know, my daughter inside there almost died a matter of hours ago, and yet here's people going to work, going about their lives. Here's people going on as though nothing profound just happened. And this in some ways kind of reflects back to the story that I started off telling you about here as well, that I had worried about something for almost 5 years. And when I finally implemented it, followed the steps there, I got to the end. You know what? Life goes on. And particularly poignant advice at the moment, given the state that we're in, pandemic, particularly here in Australia and Victoria. And I know for wherever you are around the world listening to this, is that sometimes we can focus a lot on the things that we can have very little impact about. There are things that we can do to influence governments, but at the end of the day, they're going to do what they do there too. And when we focus on things that are outside of our control, then inevitably what comes from that is a sense of frustration and anxiety and stress and all those kind of things there too. And with all of that, one of my mantras has always been, what if this could be fun? And to remind myself to not take it all so seriously. So that has been the end of a chapter for me and the beginning of a new one opening up as well, which I'm really excited to continue to share with you. I'm excited that we still have our practice down at Lara. We have 4 chiropractors that we have as a testing lab to implement lots of these ideas that I think about as well. Hopefully some of these lessons have been valuable for you. Maybe there's been some learning of 1 or 2 of them. Like I started off with, remember to question everything, including the things that I've shared with you today. So thank you for being so generous and listening as I had a little bit of a trip back down memory lane of the major learnings that I've had as well. So folks, until next time, thanks for all that you do. Keep saving lives, and I'll see you back here real soon. Bye. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.